I never thought a simple Friday night could spiral into a full-blown neighborhood disaster. It started innocently enough. I had been cooped up all week, buried under deadlines, and the garage felt like the perfect place to unwind. I invited a handful of close friends over, nothing wild, just music, drinks, laughter, a few string lights, a couple of speakers, and a cooler stuffed with ice. Hardly a scene to alarm anyone. But suburban life has its own rules. Rules enforced not by law, but by something far more relentless, the HOA. And in our neighborhood, that rule enforcing, I went by the name of Karen. Karen Henderson, a walking checklist of grievances and infractions. Her life seemed to revolve around monitoring the perfectly trimmed lawns, the exact placement of welcome mats, and the decibel levels of our music. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner of suburban decency. I didn't see it coming. I was too busy laughing with my friends, sharing stories, enjoying the rare taste of freedom. The night was calm, a little warm, music buzzing in the background. Then I saw her, standing at the edge of my driveway, hands on her hips, jaw tight. Her eyes burned with a fury I had come to recognize from neighborhood gossip. "Karen, is this really necessary?" she shouted, striding toward the garage with purpose. Her voice had that shrill, high-pitched quality that could cut glass. She wasn't asking, it was an accusation. Her hair, perfectly styled as if she had been preparing for this confrontation all week, framed her face like armor. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. "Hey, Karen, we're just having a few friends over, nothing loud." But she didn't hear me. Or maybe she did, and it made her angrier. "This is against HOA rules," she barked. "The noise, the cars, this." She gestured dramatically at the open garage, as if it were a crime scene. "You think you can just do whatever you want?" I tried reasoning, but reasoning rarely works with Karen. She had already dialed her phone, her fingers flying over the screen like a pianist on a mission. And that's when I realized she wasn't just complaining. She was calling the police. The night suddenly shifted. The easy warmth of friends and music evaporated, replaced by tension so thick I could almost touch it. I could feel the unease ripple through the group. A couple of friends exchanged nervous glances. One muttered under his breath, "Here we go." I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm, trying to de-escalate. "Karen, really, it's just a small gathering. We're not bothering anyone." But her eyes narrowed. Her lips pressed together in a thin line of resolve. "I don't care," she snapped. "I've had enough of people ignoring the rules." And then, with a swipe of her phone, she vanished down the street, presumably to summon reinforcements. The minutes stretched. Every laugh, every clink of a bottle, felt louder, sharper, somehow wrong. I glanced at my friends. "Stay calm," I whispered. "Just, let's see what happens." Then the first patrol car appeared, lights flashing, engine humming, as it rolled slowly up our street. My heart sank. This was no joke. Karen emerged from behind a neighbor's hedge, smug satisfaction radiating off her like heat from the sun. "You see," she shouted at the officers. "They're breaking the rules. Right here in my neighborhood." The police officers stepped out cautiously. They weren't laughing, but there was a subtle edge of disbelief in their posture. One of them, a younger officer, looked at me and my friends, then back at Karen. "Ma'am," he said politely, "can you tell us exactly what rule was broken?" Karen, of course, had her answer ready. She listed them like a legal affidavit: noise ordinance, parking violations, improper use of common areas. Her voice was rehearsed, precise, tinged with righteous indignation. I opened my mouth to respond. But before I could, the officer glanced at my friend holding the speaker, then at the small group sipping drinks. And then he said something I didn't expect. "Ma'am, are you aware this is a private residence? And these are the homeowner's invited guests?" Karen's face twitched. Her lips parted, her brow furrowed. She stumbled over her words, trying to correct the officer, insisting that HOA rules should override common sense. It was beautiful in a way. The moment when the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood realized the law didn't bend to her will. But the story didn't end there. Because suburban revenge doesn't usually arrive in a straight line. It's subtle, it builds in layers, feeding off embarrassment, frustration, and gossip. And Karen was about to learn a lesson she wouldn't forget. While she argued with the officers, my friends and I quietly moved the party back into the garage. We dimmed the lights, played soft music, and kept conversation low. It wasn't about hiding. It was about letting her feel the sting of watching her own dramatic moment fizzle into awkward silence. I couldn't help but watch her. She paced the street, muttering into her phone, occasionally pointing toward the garage like a general rallying troops who weren't there. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, eyes wide, ears tuned. The tension in the air was a mix of curiosity and silent amusement. And that's when the unexpected happened. A second patrol car turned the corner, then a third. One by one, 4 more officers arrived, each looking more bewildered than the last. Karen froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She was clearly not expecting this kind of attention. I leaned over to my friend and whispered, "I think she's about to get an education in humility." The officers stepped forward, forming a polite barrier between Karen and the garage. One of them, clearly the senior officer, approached Karen and said, "Ma'am, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. The homeowner has the right to host guests on their property. We're just here to make sure everything stays safe." Karen's voice wavered. Her usual confidence cracked. She looked around, realizing that everyone on the street, neighbors, drivers, even kids on bikes, were now witnesses. The humiliation was immediate, sharp, and probably unforgettable. And yet, as much as I wanted to celebrate, I knew better than to let the night end on a high note. Suburban drama is a slow burn. The story isn't just the argument, the police arrival, or Karen's stunned silence. It's what comes next. The whispered conversations over fences, the text messages sent in hushed tones, the planning of subtle countermeasures. I glanced at the party, now subdued, and smiled. There was a quiet thrill in this moment, a sense of victory without having to raise my voice. Karen had made the mistake of turning private fun into public spectacle, and the neighborhood had witnessed it. But I also knew to tread carefully. Revenge in suburbia isn't about fireworks, it's about strategy. Every action has consequences. Every small humiliation can breed a larger reaction. The night wore on. Karen eventually left, phone glued to her ear, presumably calling the HOA board to report the incident. The officers stayed just long enough to ensure no real trouble brewed, then drove off into the quiet streets. We returned to our small celebration, quieter now, the tension giving way to relief. But the air still buzzed with electricity, the sense that something bigger was simmering just below the surface. Karen would recover. She always did. But she would also remember this night, the night her authority, her meticulously curated image of power, was questioned, witnessed, and quietly mocked. And that's where we leave it, for now. The street returned to relative calm, but the story was far from over. There were more phone calls to be made, more HOA meetings to attend, more subtle maneuvers to anticipate. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. This wasn't just about a garage party. It was about boundaries, ego, and the quiet war that rages behind picket fences and manicured lawns. Karen had thrown the first punch with her call to the police, and I had weathered it. But suburban revenge doesn't end in a single night. It's a chess game, and I was just making my first move. The street was quiet again. Music drifted faintly from the garage. Lights flickered in windows. And somewhere, beyond the neatly trimmed hedges, Karen's wheels were turning. This was far from over. The real drama was only beginning. The morning after the garage party, the neighborhood felt different. There was a tension in the air that wasn't there before. Conversations across fences were quieter, shorter, filled with subtle glances and knowing smiles. Even the mailman seemed to hesitate at my driveway, peering around as if expecting fireworks to erupt at any moment. Karen, of course, was not idle. By 9 a.m., she had already sent out a flurry of emails to the HOA board. Each message was a work of art in passive-aggressive fury. She meticulously described the incident, emphasizing the loud music, the illegal parking, and my blatant disregard for neighborhood rules. She attached photos she had taken from her front yard, though mostly blurry shots of the garage lights and some of my friends waving at her, unaware they were being documented. I didn't respond, not yet. Patience is a weapon in these kinds of battles, and I had learned that from living in this neighborhood long enough. Let her fume. Let her overreach. Every action she took was fuel for the next move. By mid-morning, I began noticing subtle changes. Neighbors who had previously ignored me now gave me sideways looks, cautious smiles. A few older couples whispered as I walked past, shaking their heads in polite disapproval. It was the aftermath of a Karen storm, the ripple effect of ego and authority colliding with reality. But the real escalation began when the HOA called a special meeting. The invitation landed in my mailbox, printed in formal black letters on heavy cardstock. It wasn't a friendly, let's talk it out meeting. No, this was a tribunal, a stage for Karen to strut, armed with her emails, photos, and a stack of HOA guidelines. The meeting took place in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs. I arrived early, notebook in hand, mentally preparing for the performance I knew was about to unfold. The other attendees trickled in, neighbors ranging from curious onlookers to people who seemed genuinely annoyed by the HOA's obsession with control. Karen arrived last, of course, dressed in her signature perfection, crisp blouse, impeccable skirt, and that same glint in her eyes that promised chaos. She scanned the room, nodding at the board members like a general reviewing her officers. Then she found me. Her stare was electric, a mix of contempt, fury, and the faintest tremor of insecurity that she thought no one could see. The board president called the meeting to order. Minutes were read, formalities observed, but the room's energy was tense, crackling like a storm about to break. Then Karen stood. All eyes turned to her, as if expecting fireworks, and in some ways, that's exactly what she intended. I'm here to report a serious violation of HOA rules, she began, her voice loud and precise. She detailed the garage party, the music, the guests, the disturbance to the neighborhood. She paused dramatically, letting her words hang in the air, heavy and accusatory. A few neighbors nodded silently, but many others looked skeptical, whispering to each other behind folded hands. When it was my turn, I didn't rush. I let her words settle, like oil on water. Then I spoke, calm and measured. This was a private gathering, I said. Friends invited, no disturbances outside my property. The police were called, yes, and they confirmed no laws were broken. HOA guidelines do not override personal property rights. A murmur went through the room. Some neighbors looked relieved, some annoyed. Karen's face tightened. Her lips pressed together, forming a thin line of frustration. I could see the gears turning in her mind, desperate to regain control, desperate to rewrite the narrative. But she wasn't done. Oh, so now you're using the police as a shield? She snapped. You think having friends over excuses breaking every rule we have? The noise, the parking, the visibility, this affects everyone. You can't just do whatever you want. I leaned back, keeping my expression neutral. Karen, the police confirmed there was no violation of the law. As for HOA rules, there are procedures to follow. If there was a legitimate concern, you should have reported it formally instead of creating a spectacle. The room went quiet. Karen's voice wavered slightly, caught between indignation and the realization that her theatrics might not land the way she planned. Board members exchanged glances, some subtly rolling their eyes, others scribbling notes. And then came the subtle, devastating move. One neighbor, Mrs. Taylor, a quiet woman who rarely spoke, raised her hand. I lived directly across from the garage, she said softly. I didn't hear a thing. The music was contained, and there was no disturbance. Honestly, this feels like personal vendetta rather than a rule violation. Karen's head jerked toward her. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. Excuse me, she hissed, trying to mask her panic. This isn't about personal feelings. It's about keeping our community safe and orderly. The senior board member cleared his throat. Karen, while your concern is noted, the evidence suggests no actionable violation occurred. Perhaps next time, a direct conversation or a formal complaint before involving the police might be more appropriate. Karen froze. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I could see the color drain from her face, the forced smile fading into tension. For the first time, she was on the defensive. But suburban drama has a funny way of evolving. Karen's humiliation didn't stop with a few whispered corrections. No, she was relentless. By the time the meeting ended, she had already drafted another email, this time to every resident, subtly framing the event as a warning about recent disturbances. Her words were carefully chosen, dripping with implication, designed to provoke gossip without making her look overtly wrong. I knew the next phase had begun. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a battle for narrative control. Karen wanted everyone to see her as the vigilant protector of morality and order. I, on the other hand, had learned that sometimes the most effective response is patience and observation. Over the next few days, the neighborhood transformed. Small slights became amplified. Doors closed a little faster when I passed. Kids were shushed with extra intensity. Cars that had parked near my driveway received notes about community standards. And Karen? She started visiting neighbors individually, coffee in hand, rehearsing her complaints, attempting to rally support. I watched discreetly from my porch, noticing the cracks. Some neighbors nodded politely but didn't commit. Some avoided her altogether, walking the other way. Her influence, once unquestioned, was slowly being tested. Meanwhile, I began my own subtle campaign. Not overt revenge, too obvious and risky. No, this was the art of patience. A friendly wave to neighbors, a polite nod when Karen passed, a quiet but confident presence that contrasted with her frantic energy. Every time she tried to stir trouble, I responded with calm, measured actions. The contrast was telling. The street noticed. Then, one afternoon, an opportunity presented itself. Karen had overextended, attempting to enforce a new parking rule she had invented, claiming it applied to my property. I knew it was a stretch, so I let her take the first step, watching as she printed notices, posted them, and called a small group of residents to warn them. The morning after, a neighbor walked over to me, whispering with a grin, "Karen's at it again. You're going to have fun with this one." I nodded, keeping my tone neutral, but inside I was already planning. Suburban revenge isn't loud. It's subtle, cumulative, and satisfying when the other person can't predict the next move. As I watched Karen pace her yard later that evening, phone glued to her ear, I realized something. She was panicking, scrambling, trying to regain control, and every effort made her look more absurd. The perfect storm of petty HOA power trips and miscalculated moves was unfolding beautifully. And yet, I had to remind myself, patience. The story wasn't over. It was evolving. Karen would continue to escalate. The HOA might intervene. Neighbors would gossip. All the pieces were in place. The tension, the stakes, the delicate balance of power. I smiled quietly, sipping my coffee on the porch, letting her chaos run its course while I remained the calm center. The night fell. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. I could see Karen in the distance, muttering into her phone, occasionally glancing toward my house. She didn't notice me watching. She didn't know I was already thinking 3 steps ahead, ready for whatever the next HOA meeting, email, or confrontation might bring. The neighborhood felt alive, buzzing with anticipation. Every whispered conversation, every sideways glance, every petty complaint became a thread in a larger tapestry of conflict. And I realized, with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, that the garage party was just the beginning. Suburban battles rarely end with a single victory. They are drawn-out affairs, full of strategy, patience, and small victories that accumulate over time. Karen had thrown the first punch, and I had endured it. Now the real game had begun. The air was thick with anticipation. Somewhere beyond the fences, Karen's next move was brewing. And I was ready. The quiet tension of the street promised more drama, more subtle confrontations, and more opportunities to turn her own hubris against her. The battle lines were drawn, but the war was far from over. And as I stepped back into the house, letting the porch light cast a warm glow on the driveway, I knew one thing for certain. Karen had just discovered that challenging me was going to cost her more than she ever imagined. The days after the HOA meeting felt quieter, but the tension lingered like an invisible fog. Karen didn't give up immediately. She continued her rounds, stopping at neighbors' homes, calling anyone she thought might support her cause. Her movements were deliberate, calculated, but each visit seemed to fall flat. Some neighbors politely listened and nodded, but most quietly excused themselves, leaving her words hanging in the air like a half-spoken accusation. I kept my distance, letting her frustration grow. I didn't need to confront her directly anymore. The situation had momentum. Karen's energy, fueled by obsession, was now working against her. Her neighbors were starting to see the pattern, and whispers of skepticism and amusement traveled faster than her emails ever could. One afternoon, as I was watering the garden, I noticed her pacing near the community center, phone glued to her ear. Her voice was sharp, but there was a tremor of fatigue I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just trying to enforce the rules now. She was trying to salvage her reputation. And in doing so, she exposed herself to the subtle consequences of her own behavior. The final act came during the next HOA board meeting, which Karen had called to address the ongoing disturbances at my home. I arrived early, as always, mentally prepared and calm. Other residents filtered in, many of them curious about how this final confrontation would unfold. The room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Tension hummed beneath the surface, and I could sense the collective anticipation. Karen strutted in last, armed with printed emails, photos, and her ever-present sense of moral superiority. She began her speech immediately, reciting her complaints with rehearsed precision. But the room was different this time. Neighbors exchanged glances that weren't supportive of her. Some rolled their eyes. Some murmured quietly to each other. When it was my turn, I didn't need to argue. I simply stated the facts. The police had been called previously, and they confirmed there were no violations. The neighborhood had observed the events, and the so-called disturbances had caused no harm. I spoke clearly, without anger, without sarcasm, just facts and calm confidence. Karen's shoulders slumped slightly as the room absorbed my words. Her voice faltered when she tried to argue, and one by one, the board members spoke. They acknowledged that while her concern for community standards was understandable, her methods had been excessive and disruptive. Her accusations were dismissed, not with malice, but with measured reasoning. The turning point came when Mrs. Taylor, the neighbor who had witnessed the garage party firsthand, spoke up. Her words were calm but firm. "I live right across from the garage," she said. "I heard no disturbance, and the gathering did not negatively impact my household. I believe the issue here is less about the event and more about personal conflict." Karen's face went pale. The room was quiet, her influence crumbling in real time. Even the board members, who had been neutral, exchanged subtle looks of agreement. It was clear Karen had lost. For a moment, I considered stopping there, letting the situation resolve quietly. But instead, I offered a final comment, not to humiliate her, but to close the chapter with dignity. "Neighbors are responsible for living respectfully." "Yes," I said, "but respect is mutual. Accusations, exaggerations, and fear-mongering only erode the sense of community we all share. Let's focus on working together instead of turning our streets into battlegrounds." A soft murmur of approval filled the room. Karen tried to interject, but her words fell flat. The board thanked everyone for attending and adjourned the meeting. The finality in the air was palpable. Outside, the street felt lighter. Neighbors who had remained cautious approached me, offering quiet smiles, thumbs-up gestures, and small words of encouragement. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for weeks began to dissipate. Karen, meanwhile, retreated to her home, phone in hand, still muttering about the injustice. But her energy had shifted from confidence to frustration. That night, as I stepped onto my porch with a cup of tea, I felt a sense of relief and quiet satisfaction. The garage was silent, the lights dimmed, and the neighborhood seemed finally calm. It wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming peace, boundaries, and dignity in a place where control and ego had threatened to dominate. Karen's power trips had run their course. The neighbors had observed, the facts had been presented, and the outcome was clear. Suburban life resumed its usual rhythm, albeit with a story now etched into its collective memory, a story of drama, confrontation, and ultimately, quiet resilience. I knew this wouldn't be the last petty battle in the neighborhood. There would always be rules, disagreements, and the occasional overzealous neighbor. But now I had learned something invaluable. Patience, calmness, and clear boundaries are stronger than anger, intimidation, or spectacle. Karen had underestimated the subtle power of composure. In trying to humiliate me, she had only highlighted the difference between chaos and measured action. As the stars appeared over the quiet street, I allowed myself a small smile. The garage party, the police, the HOA drama, it had all been a test of patience and strategy. And in the end, balance had been restored. The neighborhood would remember the incident for months, perhaps years, as a cautionary tale of ego, overreach, and the importance of perspective. And I would remember it as the night when calmness, careful observation, and quiet dignity won over theatrics and entitlement. I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me. Outside, the streetlights glimmered across manicured lawns, and the night felt finally still. The tension had eased, the drama had run its course, and suburban peace returned, not through confrontation, but through patience and resolve. Karen's calls, emails, and plans would continue, I knew, but their impact had been diminished. The neighborhood had seen the truth, and sometimes that was enough. As I poured another cup of tea, I felt a quiet sense of victory, not loud or boastful, but profound and lasting. For the first time in weeks, the garage was just a garage again. The music, the laughter, the minor chaos, it was over. And yet, the story would remain, a subtle reminder that even in the quietest suburbs, drama can flare, egos can collide, and resilience can prevail. And that was enough.